I'm Aaron Porras, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, Russia blocks an international investigation into the chemical attacks in Syria last week. Former Iranian President Ahmadinejad throws his hat again into the upcoming elections, and the defense minister shows off his comedic acting skills. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. There's frustration and disappointment at the United Nations Security Council today after Russia once again blocked an international action on Syria. Meanwhile, sharp disagreements over the crisis between the United States and Russia is escalating. As expected, Moscow vetoed the draft resolution condemning the suspected use of sarin gas that killed at least 87 people in Idlib, 30 of them children. The failed vote came as United States Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was reportedly receiving a chilly reception at the Kremlin. The West strongly believes Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is behind the April 4th chemical attack and is demanding his regime cooperate with an official investigation like the one proposed in the vetoed draft last night.
The perspective from the United States, supported by the facts that we have, are conclusive that the recent chemical weapons attack carried out in Syria was planned, and it was directed and executed by Syrian regime forces, and we're quite confident of that. This is just the latest in a series of the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime.
Washington is revising its stance on Assad and is now calling for him to step down from power.
We do think it's important that Assad's departure is done in an orderly way, so that certain interests and constituencies that he represents feel they have been represented at the negotiating table for a political solution.
The top American diplomat also alluded to possible international prosecution of the Syrian president.
The issue that as time goes by and more evidence continues to be gathered, it is possible that the threshold necessary to charge individuals, including Bashar al-Assad, may be achieved.
Tillerson's Russian counterpart, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, said it's wrong to blame Assad without knowing the facts. While stressing mutual interest in combating the Islamic State in Syria, he insisted that the toppling of the Damascus regime is not an option.
Если с ИГИЛ действительно нужно бороться и можно ИГИЛ победить, не пытаясь свергать режим, то, свергнув режим, вполне можно не то что не победить ИГИЛ, а проиграть ИГИЛ. Так что давайте все-таки немножко будем руководствоваться здравым, прагматичным смыслом, а не эмоциями.
Lavrov also underscored Moscow's stance that last week's United States missile strike on a Syrian air base was illegal. The missile strikes were in response to an April 4th nerve gas attack. Following the Moscow talks, Tillerson commented that there's now a low level of trust between the United States and Russia. Joining me today in the studio to discuss the diplomatic repercussions from Russia's veto is Yosef Livni, a career diplomat who has served as former Israeli ambassador to Mexico, El Salvador, and New Zealand. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So my first question to you, Ambassador Livni, is what is the reaction in the international community to Russia's veto, particularly from areas that you're familiar with, that you've worked in?
Well, I'm sure that most countries express a wide variety of reactions stemming from shock, surprise, not surprise, disbelief, because obviously most nations would tend to agree that the use of chemical weapons is something that should be punished, and that the Security Council is the proper venue to discuss different actions that may be taken in order to investigate what really happened there. It is unfortunate that, as in many cases in the past, there's always someone who vetoes a resolution, not because the resolution in itself is negative, but because they want to keep somebody's back. And right. I think this is what happened.
So, you know, Russia isn't just defending the Assad regime, they're actually denying that Assad is necessarily responsible for it without getting all of the facts. You know, what kind of message is that sending?
Look, I think that the Russians are not going to abandon the Assad regime. He is their ally. They've invested a lot in terms of political investment, economic resources, what have you. So I doubt very much whether they will be willing to just, you know, say, oh, okay, he did something which we disagree with, therefore he should go. And I think that they will look for any way they can in order to alleviate the pressure that is being put on Assad. And if nations, if the West is calling for Assad's replacement, then they will try to do whatever they can in order to make sure that he stays there and that their investment, the resources they've invested in Syria are kept, are saved.
So what might we expect in the coming future? You know, the United States is sending in more airstrikes this time against ISIS, but still within Syrian border, it's still, you know, kind of a toss-up on who it is that they're attacking. And if they try to oust Assad, if that's an actual attempt from the West to push him out, could that be a new Cold War or a new World War?
Look, the U.S. has intervened in Syria in the past, so bombing ISIS strongholds is not something new.
Right.
They will have to find a way to coordinate whatever is happening there. Because one thing I'm sure neither of them wants is for some aircraft belonging either to the US or to the Russians being shot down by one of the other. I think that will create an untenable situation. And I think that both countries, they may disagree on Syria. They may look each other, and try to look at the, convince the other one to back away. But I think that at the end of the day, both of them will try to make sure that there is some sort of an area where they can agree on and at least avoid any confrontation between the two forces, namely the US and Russia, because that is something that is not going to help anyone. Is it going to degenerate into a Cold War? Well, the kind of language that is being used over the last week does look like some sort of a Cold War. Let's hope it stays within diplomatic exchanges and doesn't degenerate into something far worse.
Of course. All right, so that brings me to my last question actually. If you have Russia with veto power and, the dialogue that's currently being heard coming out of Moscow and from the United States, what can be done, to create an international action against Assad or against Syria's grievous behavior?
I think that at the end, that one of the most important issues is for all the relevant forces, the stakeholders, if you wish, in Syria, they all have to agree on at least what do we do about this chemical weapon stuff? How do we start investigating? This is a very tall order, because what if you find out that the Assad regime really did use chemical weapons against civilian population? What happens then? This is something that I don't see an end to this confrontation or in the near future. It is something that may go on for a while, and if Assad uses chemical weapons again, we don't know what's happening. But when it all happened, many commentators said that the Russians were very unhappy with Assad using chemical weapons.
It drags them in.
it puts them in a situation they don't like to be in.
Sure.
They have to defend something which they don't want to. So hopefully they will play some sort of a constructive role trying to calm Assad down, make sure that he doesn't go beyond a certain threshold.
To rein him in, basically.
Exactly. I think this is the main task at this point. How do you make sure, how do you ascertain that Assad doesn't feel that he can do whatever he wants? And I think that the only people who can do it are the Russians, because the Iranians are not going to do it. Hezbollah certainly is not going to do it. The only power that can apply sufficient pressure on Assad is Russia.
All right, Ambassador Yosef Livni, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Minister of Defense Avigdor Lieberman leveled harsh criticism at the United Nations for ignoring Palestinian-on-Palestinian violence in Gaza and Lebanon, whilst regularly condemning justified Israeli actions against terrorism. According to a statement released by the defense minister's spokesperson, the comments were made during a telephone call with UN Mideast envoy Nikolai Mladenov. According to the statement, Lieberman alleges that the United Nations is ignoring recent killings and executions in Gaza, as well as in the Ain al-Hilweh refugee camp in Lebanon. Last week, fighting between the Palestinian Authority's Fatah party and a Sunni Islamist group left 4 dead and more than a dozen wounded in the Ain al-Hilweh refugee camp. In addition, Hamas executed 3 men earlier this month for allegedly collaborating with Israel. Ravina Shamdasani, spokesperson for the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, condemned the executions in Gaza and said that, quote, the executions were carried out in breach of Palestine's obligations under international law, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which places stringent conditions on the use of the death penalty, end quote. Mladenov's office issued a no comment when asked about the phone call. However, on Saturday, he did express deep concern over growing tensions in Gaza. In a surprise move, former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is just entering himself into Iran's upcoming presidential elections, despite this being against the wishes of the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. The Ayatollah reportedly told Ahmadinejad not to enter late last year, but the former president says it was just advice. Ahmadinejad is a hardliner who's repeatedly threatened the West, America, and Israel, and has questioned the existence of the Holocaust. He was forced to release control in 2013 due to term limits, but returning to public office now appears possible. All that being said, Iranian analysts say that the friendly advice from Ayatollah Khamenei may just be framed that way to save face. But really, Khamenei and his camp view Ahmadinejad's version of Islamic practice as inappropriate, and the former president may pay for putting his name in the running. According to political analyst Hamid Faravajian, Khamenei will not forget this move, which was aimed to harm his image. Convicted Palestinian terrorist Marwan Barghouti says he's preparing to follow through on his threats and is now set to launch a widespread hunger strike against Israeli prison conditions this coming Monday. Barghouti was a leader of the Palestinian Fatah faction before being sent to jail in 2004 to serve 5 life sentences for murdering Israeli civilians. He's very popular among the Palestinian population, though, and is even a favored candidate to succeed Mahmoud Abbas as president. He's claiming thousands of Palestinian prisoners will join him in the mass action if their demands aren't met by then. Barghouti has allegedly presented a list of demands. Among them are 2 visitor permits to family members per month, the installation of public telephones in every wing of the prison, free entry to visitors under 16 years old, and the removal of security restrictions on visitations. They also want expanded medical care and greater access to educational materials. Further still, they're also against Israel's use of administrative detention, which means the incarceration of Palestinians on terror charges without trial. The Israel Prison Service says it's not at all concerned about the threatened hunger strike and will deal with it if it happens. And several other Palestinian groups like the Fatah student movement are calling on their supporters to either fast or participate in street protests in solidarity with the prisoners. A massive search for 3 missing teenagers in the Sea of Galilee is currently ongoing. All 3 young men entered the lake on inflatable mattresses, but strong winds blew them far from the shore. 80 other people were also swept deep into the lake by heavy winds, but have since been rescued. The ongoing search has been slowed down by strong winds and occasional rain,
A lifeguard who had already hauled 5 people from the water told the online news source Ynet that, quote, people don't take into consideration the easterly winds and get drawn out, end quote. The Sea of Galilee is Israel's largest freshwater lake, spanning some 160 square miles, and is a popular tourist destination for Israelis, especially during the week-long Passover holiday. The Sea of Galilee is also said to be where Jesus walked on water some 2,000 years ago.
Hundreds are attending a solidarity march in Ashkelon demanding the return of Abraham Mengistu from Gaza. Mengistu crossed the border into Gaza in 2014 and has, as of now, been held there for 948 days.
Hundreds are now attending a solidarity march in Ashkelon demanding the return of Abraham Mengistu from Gaza. Mengistu crossed the border into Gaza in 2014 and has, of now, been held there for 948 days. His family claims that Mengistu's poor mental health led him to voluntarily cross the border into Hamas-run Gaza Strip. So far, there has been no word as to Mengistu's well-being or of any ongoing negotiations with Hamas to secure his release. During the march, Mengistu's mother pled for compassion during the Passover season, saying, quote, we have now gone through a third holiday without Abraham, and it's too hard to bear. I have no more strength to cope with the uncertainty. My son is sick, and I do not know if he's being treated. I have lost hope. I do not sleep at night, and after so long I would expect to begin to hear that something is happening. I don't believe all the promises from the government. End quote.
You all know the song Tradition from The Fiddler on the Roof, right? Well, this Passover holiday, increased efforts to enforce tradition aren't necessarily being welcomed by everybody, and certainly less whimsically. During the Passover holiday, Jews are only supposed to eat unleavened bread to symbolize the food eaten by the ancient Israelites during their passage from slavery in Egypt to freedom in the Holy Land. Usually no one bothers vendors around Jerusalem's Old City, but this year the municipality is enforcing an old law banning the sale of bread during the 7-day festival. They are ignoring most of the Old City compound, but are cracking down on the Jaffa Gate entrance that's used by tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox worshippers to reach the Jewish quarter and the Western Wall. Most of the bagel merchants complied, but one guy operating without a license refused, so his leavened items were confiscated. Meanwhile, the Israeli cabinet has just approved a new bill that would authorize rabbinical courts to legally adjudicate civil disputes based on Jewish halachic religious law. Supporters say that many rabbis have already been doing this for years and that all the involved parties would have to agree to take their matters before the religious court. They also say none of the verdicts would violate state law, but critics argue that any potential passage of the bill by the Knesset would create 2 parallel legal systems. Opposition lawmakers also contend the religious courts would discriminate against women or possibly result in religious coercion. Similar attempts to introduce this kind of legislation since 2006 have all failed. Now for something a little bit more poignant. 72 years after the end of World War II, hundreds of Jewish university students in Lithuania are finally being awarded honorary degrees.
The gesture is largely symbolic, of course, because many of the former scholars were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. The effort came about after Israeli professor Moshe Lapidot asked the University of Vilnius to recognize the academic achievements of his uncle who died in the Holocaust. The institution's rector not only agreed to the request, but expanded it to include all the Jewish students and lecturers who were kicked out of the school in keeping with anti-Jewish edicts ordered by the occupying Germans. The university is now actively trying to locate members of its missing student body so the diplomas can be given to them or their descendants in memoriam. Israel's ambassador to Lithuania, Amir Maimon, supported the initiative and was on hand during this week's honorary ceremony for Professor Lapidot's cousin and 3 others.
As Christians around the world are marking the Easter Holy Week commemorating Jesus' crucifixion, burial, and resurrection, a group of specialists in Bethlehem is working to revive an ancient art form that first arose in the early days of their faith.
It's known as the sacred art of iconography. Wooden panels are meticulously carved and painted with depictions of biblical scenes and religious figures, and then embossed in gold. Many Orthodox Christians often light candles or pray before the icons. The Bethlehem Center is located near the Church of the Nativity, revered by worshippers as the site of the Savior's birth. According to tradition, the ancient practice originated in the year 60, when Luke the Evangelist painted the first Christian icon in Jerusalem. Today's masters exclusively use pigments from the Holy Land, including hand-ground stones from Jericho, to produce yellow. They often recite scripture while creating their one-of-a-kind works of art, which is blessed by a local archbishop upon completion. No one is interested in the commercial aspect of their craft and instead describe their endeavors to create holy images as an honor.
Turning now to the arts, a short movie made by an Israeli student back in 2007 has now made the Guinness Book of World Records for having been awarded more prizes than any other film of its type in history. The man behind the accolades is Lior Geller. His American Academy Prize-nominated film called Rhodes is about a young Arab boy who's helped by a demobilized Israeli soldier to escape from his life of violence and drugs. The 20-minute masterpiece has garnered 24 awards and has been showcased at a whopping 60 festivals in 36 different countries. After his early success in the industry, Geller relocated to Hollywood. Geller's already sold several new screenplays, among which is a true-life spy thriller about Israel's spy in Syria, Eli Cohen, called Alone in Damascus. The Israeli writer is now working on turning the history of the Jewish Maccabees' resistance against the Greek army from around 164 to 63 BCE into a television series. He is doing so in conjunction with the creator of a 2005 TV show called Rome. Best of all, Geller has also started rewriting the movie that brought him fame and fortune, Rhodes, into a full-length feature film.
لفتك الجاي ب 15,000.
ما تسمع.
قريتي وتخارب زمان شفت شي بسكتة. كم محاولين.
Yeah. We at war where I fail. God show me the way because the devil's trying to break me down.
شو معنا بسريع؟
شو صارك المصاري؟ Everything that I pray is that my feet don't fail me now.
Now it seems like Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman is throwing his hat into the Israeli cinematic ring as he recently released a Passover viral video on his Facebook page. Let's take a look.
וואי אחי, פסח הזה, מה זה הגזמתי? חופשי, לא אוכלים חמץ, אבל בסוף אוכלים הכי הרבה. כן, אה? נו מה אחי, מה עושים היום? לא יודע, אתה רוצה נצא, נעשה משהו? לא אחי, אני רוצה איזה חבר חדש. איזה מישהו שינער אותנו. יואו, יש לי אחי חבר מפוצץ אנרגיות, חבל לך על הזמן, לא שמע לי שולח לו. מה, אז איך לא אמרת עד עכשיו? הנה, שלחתי לו הודעה כל רגע, הוא פה. הנה, הוא פה אחי, הוא פה, סף לו. ערב טוב. אז מה, כבוד השר? מה אתה עושה כשמשעמם לך?
אף פעם לא משעמם במשרד הביטחון.
אוקיי. ומה עם סרטים? אתה רואה סרטים?
דוקומנטריים על קום המדינה.
פחות. אני לא בטוח שיש את זה ב-VOD. תבחר, שמאל ימין.
ימין, תמיד ימין.
טוב, אנחנו הולכים לעשות סרטון ויראלי.
מה זה סרטון ויראלי?
כולם עושים את זה עכשיו, כבוד השר, זה יכול להגיע למאות אלפי צפיות, כל המדינה תראה. כל המדינה.
אבל אני לא יודע לשחק.
זה שטויות, כבוד השר, אנחנו נדאג לזה. כל מה שצריך זה רעיון טוב. יש לי.
ועכשיו ברצינות, חג שמח וכשר לכם, למשפחות שלכם, לחיילות ולחיילי צה"ל ולכל עם ישראל. שיהיה חג בטוח ושקט. אנחנו נעשה הכל כדי שכך יהיה. חג שמח.
The Hebrew word of the day is brought to you by the University of Haifa, Hebrew Summer Ulpan, open to everyone. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. The Sea of Galilee, or the Kinneret as it's called in Hebrew, is a significant site for many, not just because of its religious significance to Abrahamic faiths. That's why today's word will be agam, meaning lake or pond. Now you might be wondering why the word is agam, meaning lake, when talking about the Sea of Galilee. Well, the answer is twofold. First, because surprisingly, the Sea of Galilee is a sea in name only, and it's really just a big freshwater agam. The second reason is because I do what I want. Now, just to wrap up, regardless of how you want to call the Kinneret, one thing is certain, that regardless of what it's called, it's an amazing place, and I hope you all get a chance to see it. Let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. The weekend has returned and is expected to be partly cloudy with a chance of showers. The low tonight is set to be around 60 or 11 degrees Celsius. The high for Friday and Saturday should sit around 75 or 21 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.65 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.